Cops of Reddit, what's the creepiest thing you've found during a house search? First story. I spent my first year as a constable in an inner-city suburb of Queensland. Now, of the population of this area, something like 40% was reserved for government-commissioned housing for rehabilitated criminals and persons released from mental health assessment centers. So here was a share of creepy situations. But to be fair, for the most part, the people we dealt with were more like cartoon characters than super shady creeps. But they had their moments. One guy that we had met before just decided one afternoon to start destroying situations in the commission set of units he lived at. He was going extremely angry, kicking through latticing, throwing pot plants off of buildings at passers-by, stealing and collecting people's shoes, smashing car windows. After about 15 minutes of mayhem, he must have run out of steam and gone back to his unit. That's where we found him, and he decided to put on a turn. He just would not stop screaming and bashing his head and face into any surface or object he could find. Eventually, we got a van with a pod and secured him. Then we went back into the house to figure out what had happened. The house is a cluster situation. Somehow he had fit 2 Kohl's trolleys inside and was using them as furniture. The whole place smelt of rotting food and shit. On the coffee table, if you can call it that, are a series of scrawled notes of just expletives, again, not massive mental function with this guy, and a wooden box. Inside the wooden box was about 100 small clip seal bags. Over half the bags had a brown granular organic material in them. The others had clear crystal-like substances in them. The brown bags were somewhat organized from smallest to largest staples. Now, with the type of people we had in the area, we had all sorts of wonderful ways these people got high. We were used to seeing weird shit that people would ingest, so we do not recognize these bags, but we have got a pretty good idea it is a narcotic of some kind. So of course we examine these bags and the contents. There is enough there to test if need be, so I get one of these bags and empty the contents to see it better. So these samples of brown material. They have got flecks of color and little tendril-like hairs, not unusual for a plant derivative to have. But I have never seen it before, so I am looking at it as I hold and talk to my partner that it might be really coarse hash derivative or a byproduct of the production of something else. Cot maybe. Might explain why this guy went nuts. A dog unit officer who assisted with the arrest comes in. He sees the scene, looks at the coffee table, looks at the bags, looks at me holding the contents of one in the palm of my hand, and straight away says, "That guy has got golden staff. He has been collecting scabs." This guy had been picking at a golden staph infection on his leg, collecting the scabs, organizing them from smallest to largest, and then eating them. The small yellow crystals, snot, and crust from his nose. Same end goal. To sum it up, I responded to a disturbance call and handled the real-life gold member's personal stash by mistake. Shit was fucked. I purchased shares in Purcell hand sanitizer after that. Second story. This one was not mine, but from an emergency medical technician friend. It is also maybe not so much creepy as nasty, but it makes my hair stand on end whenever I think on it. In one of the apartments in a nearby city, the apartment manager went in to investigate a really bad smell in one of the lower units. Apparently, people all around it were complaining. Once he saw what was up, he called the ambulance. So first responders show up, which includes said emergency medical technician friend, and there is this lady sitting on the couch. There is also something squirmy going on down below in her underpants area. So they check her out, and in the process remove said undergarments. Out falls a swarm of maggots. Yes, her lady bits were covered in them. Apparently, said individual had a fairly strong substance abuse problem. Some of the needles she poked into her nethers, which caused an infection. This led to rotting flesh, which attracted flies, which in turn led to maggots. The worst part, she was not dead, just so drugged up that she basically never noticed that she was literally rotting and falling apart from the waist down. Third story. Bathtub of dead rats in a shared house of illegal workers. They would leave traps and poison out, and when they caught the rat, they added it to the pile. The whole house was disgusting. Fourth story. My aunt is a police dispatcher. Normally, she takes calls from the public and has an officer nearby respond. But one day she was asked to work the station's radio because the normal guy was sick. That meant she was acting as the central hub of the police radio network, taking calls from officers in the field and issuing backup to them, that kind of thing. She wound up having to listen to 4 police officers talking back and forth in a panic as 2 squad cars arrived to check on a reported murder. The person who called was certain that there were multiple killers present. The victim's meat had been cut into 1-inch cubes as if their killer was going to fry them up or make kebabs. The whole crop had been disassembled like that. Bones cut into neat 1-inch segments, organs removed, separated, organized. She remembers one of the officers panicked and screamed something along the lines of, "This is obsessive-compulsive disorder movie monster nonsense." I cannot remember the exact quote, sadly, and I doubt my aunt remembers it herself. She thought they were playing a joke on her until they called for a hazardous materials crew to get the body. 5th story. We went to an apartment, which was a local drug den. A female we knew called and said the male renter had been assaulted and she had run. We got there and the door was bolted shut. I kicked the door over and over again and it would not open. What I found out later is the drug enforcement team had done a search warrant on the apartment a couple of weeks earlier, and afterward, the tenants had reinforced the door jamb with a metal plate. It took me a total of 22 times kicking the door before I broke the deadbolt in half, which flew across the room and hit the wall. We made entry, guns drawn, and started clearing the apartment. This place was the kind of spooky I have only seen in places where a lot of methamphetamine is done. It was dark, there were swastikas, 666, upside-down pentagrams, and so on painted on the wall, pictures of faces hung on the wall with the eyes crossed out, and baby dolls with their eyes scratched out into crosses. As we cleared the first room, we started seeing the blood. First on the bed, then a trail on the floor leading into the back room. The layout was weird. One main room, then a back room, which was more of a hallway and a bathroom at the end of that hallway. We followed the trail of blood down the hallway to the bathroom door. In front of the door was the renter's dog, which was shaking uncontrollably and urinating all over the floor, scared out of its mind. As we got closer, the dog became really aggressive because it was scared. I made my way around the door and entered the bathroom where I found the renter hunched over in the shower, bleeding from his face, holding his cheeks with his hands. He was frantically trying to talk, pleading with us not to hurt his dog. Blood was dripping from his mouth and I could not understand him. Then I saw the extent of what had happened to him. His jaw had been dislocated on both sides when he was beaten by 2 men with a hammer, and it was just hanging there. As he was trying to plead with us, he could only attempt to talk by flicking his blood-covered tongue in the pattern of the words, because his jaw did not work at all. 6th story. The officer had responded to a parent's call to arrest their son, whom they were convinced had relapsed on methamphetamine. What had tipped them off was when the son had started blasting both thrash metal music and pornography on maximum volume from his bedroom and locked himself inside. Communication with the child was impossible with the noise. However, the officer's partner had been able to glance into the child's window and could see that he was sitting motionless in front of his computer. He was without a shirt, but otherwise everything seemed rather normal. With permission from the parents, the officers decided to push through the lock. Moans and groans and relentless guitar deafened the ears. The only light illuminating the room was the bluish hue of the computer monitor. The child's face was a distorted grin, stretching to his lips' furthest limits. He was not without a shirt. He was in fact completely naked and drenched in sweat, and in his right hand, cupped like a chalice, were his testicles, which he had ripped off in a flurry of drug-induced self-mutilation. 7th story. I was a fresh officer with dreams of being a hero. I was dispatched to a call about a family fight. Not wife to husband, but brother to sister. The female was reporting that the male had attacked her. I arrived and located a female and a male. The male I knew from prior contacts. I detained him in handcuffs and quickly smelled the strong odor of pepper spray. I found out that after the male knocked off the female's weave, she pepper sprayed him. I knew there were different types of pepper spray, like gel. I was walking around the house taking photographs for my investigation and assessing the property damage. I noticed that in his room, the odor from the pepper spray was extremely strong, and made my eyes instantly water with a decent amount of stinging sensation. The fumes made it incredibly hard to breathe and left me without the ability to breathe at times, requiring that I leave the room to get fresh air. I found a brownish gel substance all over the walls in the shape of handprints. I photographed it and determined that it was the pepper gel that the male suspect was wiping off of his face onto the wall. I found it odd that it was all over the walls and covered the room. I thought this woman dusted him with the entire can of pepper gel. After some investigation, I took the male to jail. I responded to the same house several days later for an unrelated medical issue. There were more family members at the house, and the male was still in custody. I was having a conversation with the family as the heroic firefighters were saving the day. I inquired if they had fully cleaned up the pepper spray from the male's room. They gave me a strange look and told me there was none in there. I told them about the gel that was on the wall. I then sat there in horror as they explained to me that this man had been for years defiling his walls and playing with it. And the gel was in fact old semen, and the fumes were the pungent smell of this man's semen room. My fucking God. 8th story. My uncle is a police officer and likes to tell the story of the time he showed up to arrest a 15-year-old who skipped school to throw rocks through some cars and steal things from them. He arrives there and knows the child. They have caught him a few times at the school with illegal substances, one time for having a knife. They knock on the door, and his 18-year-old brother and 17-year-old sister open it. The police officers say what they want, and they tell them to go away. The police officers show that they have the warrant for the child's arrest and that they have to open the door. They receive another refusal, and now the other police car pulls up and asks what is going on. My uncle said they might have to force their way in and break the chain. An 18-year-old shithead says he has a gun. About 3 seconds later, the door is broken, the 18-year-old shithead is tasered, and the 17-year-old is screaming for the brother who wanted to escape. He jumps out the window and gets away, for now. The brother is thrown into the police car. The 17-year-old slaps one officer and receives the same free ride and handcuffs. They call the property manager and obtain permission to enter the house completely to investigate. The second floor reeks. It is the worst smell they have ever encountered. They get upstairs and it just gets worse and worse. They open the door and find a long, rotten body surrounded by needles and other drug shit. They leave and report it. My uncle said later it came out that their grandmother died of an overdose. The mother was in jail for stabbing a United Parcel Service guy, and the children never reported that the grandmother was dead so they could continue cashing her Social Security checks. She had been dead for about a year. Other than that, his best creepy stories were about a guy who tortures and kills animals by feeding them to other animals. Not mouse to snake, think more cat to dog, or way too large rabbit to a starved snapping turtle. He also nailed several live rodents and cats to a board in the basement where he would photograph them. The other story is about a drug dealer who killed a man and tried to put him through a meat grinder and feed him his pit bull. 9th story. I am not a police officer, but a fire investigator. We were working at a scene where 2 children had died after a space heater caught on fire, and the father was playing poker down the street while the mother was with some other man down the street. The fire department came in and cleaned up the scene, and we came in afterward. As we were sifting through the ashes to find components of the space heater, we found the 2-year-old's foot. Mind you, this was after dark, so we could barely see and were using flashlights. It was a bit creepy. 10th story. This one is from a military police friend of mine, so take it with a grain of salt. My buddy was the duty officer one night, and as such, he had to respond to serious events. One night there was a fire alarm, and he and a group of military police members rolled on it. This was a real fire. False alarms are pretty common. The source turned out to be an officer's apartment and the officer. When the investigation was conducted, it was found that the officer had filled a bathtub with fuel and field manuals and decided to commit suicide by sitting in the tub and igniting the fuel. After a few seconds, he decided that this was a bad idea and ran from the tub to his apartment door before death finally took him. So the responding military police members found his charred remains in the bits of burning flesh that were falling off him as he ran for the door. 11th story. A teacher in my little town of 35,000 souls was caught fiddling little boys. In his house, the police found a fully kitted, soundproofed abduction room. Luckily, it was still unused. The room was windowless, soundproofed, with fresh air ducts and a reinforced lockable door. It was stocked with toys, a television, a bed, and a portable toilet. Additionally, there was video surveillance equipment. This room was discovered when the man was arrested and convicted of an old fiddling case from a few years ago. 12th story. During a search of a sex offender's house, I found a room that looked like a little girl's room. In the closet, I found a 4-foot doll in a pink dress. He had no children and was in his late 50s. 13th story. My house was broken into during the day while no one was home, but luckily our neighbors saw this guy break in and called the police. They showed up and checked out our house and notified us. When we got back, we talked to the police about the break-in and whatnot. The police officer who showed up first to check the house told us when he was going into our basement, he almost had a heart attack because he thought the thief was still there, mistaking a life-size cardboard cutout of a television character in the corner for a real person. Holy cow, I did not think anyone would see this. The cutout is of Dean Winchester, who just stands there in the corner. 14th story. Tiny, quiet southern town. Whole family that had been dead for a week. Their teenage daughter's boyfriend, who she met online, was visiting from across the country. Stepfather, mother, daughter, and her friend had all murdered and hacked up by an axe. The mother was a professor at my university a block away, and when she did not show up to work for a few days, the police went to the house and talked to the murderer, who gave them some plausible excuse, so they left. He stayed in the house for a full week before leaving. The police went back when neighbors reported the smell. They caught the guy at the airport about to fly home. 15th story. Brother-in-law is a police officer. He told me about a time he and his partner were called to do a wellness check on someone with a terminal illness. The family did not know where he was, so they got to the house, knocked, and received no response. They entered the house to see if he had passed away due to his illness. They did not find him there, but what they did find was a stairway leading down to a basement. In that basement was a vast number of sex toys, ropes, harnesses, and other items. There was also a stage with a bed on it and a video camera on a tripod focused on it. He had stumbled upon this guy's sex dungeon. The guy ended up being alive but was visiting someone out of town and did not notify any of his family. 16th story. Creepiest, a dead guy. But not just your average dead guy. This guy died on his couch, surrounded by no less than 1,500 Miller Lite cans. Plus he had no friends or family. None. He was retired and his electric bill was auto-deducted from his checking account. He died on his couch and no one realized it for 5 months. When we found him, the top, front really, because he was on his back, was completely skeletonized. But the bottom, or back, against the couch, was still meaty and rotting. The half-skeleton was kind of creepy, but it is really creepy and sad that this guy left this world and it did not affect anyone. Just gone and forgotten. Funniest, respond to a burglary. Going through the house with the homeowners, a young married couple, documenting damage and loss. Step into the bedroom. There is a red vibrator on the floor. They look at it, I look at it, and then we look at each other. Spend the next 5 minutes with locked eye contact talking about the broken window, missing jewelry, missing television, and so on. Everyone refusing to look at, discuss, or acknowledge the vibrator. And then on to the living room. Oh, there was also the dead fat lady with the pug that started eating her asshole. 17th story. Friend of a cop here. He told me about how he and his buddy went to search in an apartment. They looked around and his buddy finally called him over. A guy was just in an oven. Dead, of course, but in an oven. When the guys tried to pull him out of the oven, all the contents and gas of the dead guy fell right out. A few of the guys vomited and gagged. 18th story. My mother used to work for a police department, and I would hang out there when I would be homesick from school. This old man used to walk to the gas station on the corner to get a pack of smokes and coffee every day. The gas station attendant called for a wellness check when she realized she had not seen him for a couple of weeks in the dead of summer. Police officers went, knocked, smelled something, opened the door, walked in, and instantly came back out vomiting from the smell. They had to come back later with respirators, trash bags, and snow shovels to clean up the sludge that used to be the old man. Another officer almost quit his first night on the job. Really bad accident. Guy shows up. The one car has no one in it at all. He is looking around. Guy is not on the ground anywhere. He tried to figure out if maybe the guy walked away, so he goes to look inside for some identification. Finds the guy. He hit so hard that he slammed up under and into the dashboard and was just a broken sack of bones stuffed around the steering column and the other parts. 19th story. I used to volunteer with my local police department. Nothing will beat the old lady who passed away in her house and her little Deke ate her face. Literally just the skin from the jawline to the hairline and from ear to ear. It left the eyeballs in the sockets. Just a skeleton in a lady suit doing the 1,000-yard stare. 20th story. My brother is a police officer. He told me about this time when they responded to a workplace accident where a rail yard worker had been crushed between two rail cars. The guy had been crushed or pressed into the ladder of one of the cars. They kept hearing voices coming from the body. Muffled voices, but definitely coming from the body. It took them a while to figure out the worker had been carrying a radio. Needless to say, they were a bit disturbed until they reached that conclusion. 21st story. I am not a police officer, but a paramedic. Went into a lady's house one time, cannot remember what the call was for, that had sheets of paper taped all over the walls. They all said something along the lines of, "Remember, the voices are not real." Gave me a warm, safe feeling. 22nd story. My father answered a domestic call at an apartment on the 23rd floor. As soon as he walked in, he saw blood everywhere, in pools on the floor, spatter on the walls and ceiling, smeared all over everything. He walked further in to find a woman crumpled on the floor, battered beyond recognition, and the partner is standing in front of an open window. My father started to talk to the man, to coax him into coming with, and the man immediately turned around and stepped out the window, falling 70 meters to his death. Yes, she survived. 23rd story. A friend is a police officer. Wellness check called in. Went in, smelled horrible, and discovered a large dead man, shirtless, sitting in his front room in a lawn chair watching television. He had set up an industrial space heater behind his chair, which was on at full blast. Due to the heat and apparently other factors, he had merged through the back of that lawn chair. 24th story. At my grandparents' house on vacation in Iowa. They live in the middle of nowhere, a couple of elderly neighbors in cornfields for miles. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was going to go have a smoke before bed. Their back porch has a big sliding door. Well, I walked into the room with the sliding door, and there is a man in a creepy mask, and his eyes are jet black. He is quietly wiggling the door, trying to open it. The lock is weird and lets the door have like an inch of free play. I got so scared I felt my butthole clench up, and I dropped my cigarette. Right then, the man froze and looked right at me. He paused, then started frantically shaking the door, trying to open it. Like this dude is trying to rip the door off the house. I ran over to my grandfather's gun cabinet and grabbed something. I do not know what it was, some old gun. And by the time I whipped around to point it at him, he was gone. I ran and woke up my grandparents. We all walked around the house with loaded guns for a minute, but the man was gone. A couple of weeks later, some bald man walked out of the cornfield wearing a dress. He stood by the highway for half an hour, then got picked up by some sketchy car. I will not even go into cornfields in broad daylight anymore. 25th story. Dude had 3 years worth of videos he took of boys and men of all ages using the public library bathroom. He said it was common for guys to go in there and engage in masturbation. I had no idea. He said most people had no idea they were being recorded. Others knew, they just did not care. He also had 2 external hard drives full of every kind of twisted pornography imaginable, again, involving all ages. 26th story. Not me, but my friend found a little girl in a trash bag inside a closet working for the Special Weapons Assault Team. She was used as a child sex slave, and when they were done with her, was thrown into a trash bag. Some sad stuff. 27th story. Not a police officer, but I worked alongside adult protective services and sometimes police officers. The place smelled absolutely dreadful. The elderly lady was dead, sitting upright on the couch. She had soiled herself, a watery one at that time of death, apparently. That is not the only thing that smelled bad. There were buckets of excrement, literally dozens of buckets filled with fecal matter in every room of the house. One of the police officers did not have a face mask, and he almost vomited every time he coughed or sneezed because all of the dust and the putrid smell. Apparently, the elderly lady lived in the home with a few of her brothers. Some homeless people that were squatting in the backyard were the ones that called the police because they saw the brothers leave, but had not seen the lady in days. The smell coming from the house also raised some red flags. 28th story. Not a police officer, but my brother is an emergency medical technician that told me these two stories. Police officers were called because some children were wandering around in the yard of a house in the evening. Neighbors had never seen those children, and there were no parents or other people, no lights on in the house or any signs of somebody being home. The children were not wearing any clothes. They approached the kids. The children are 6 to 10 years old, but they talk in an indistinguishable language, or basically gibberish. Police officers call for backup and an ambulance because this gets freaky. They take care of the kids outside. Nobody knows what the kids are saying. They are very pale, like they have never been out in the sun. Police officers enter the house. No electricity. It is dark, so they use their flashlights. The house seems to be used, yet is cluttered and not well taken care of. They look around and find a crib with something lying in it. No sound, no movement. Oh no. One of the police officers goes outside. He cannot handle it. Other officers walk over. Relief. It is just a doll. Real bad case of neglect. Parents apparently left for the day and forgot to lock up the kids. Another story. Police officers were called to a house. They enter and look around. They walk around the house and check the cellar. They find rooms with doors similar to prison cells. Kids inside. They can talk but cannot see because there was no light in their cells. Their eyes did not develop properly. Because my brother is an emergency medical technician, he does not know the end of the story, but this freaked everybody out. 29th story. I am Australian, worked remotely enough for some good stories. Late at night, called to a drunken dispute where a firearm had been discharged. Attended with 4 or 5 of us, the whole patrol group. Found the gun, which was all good. My partner went to unload it and realized it had no trigger. He went to touch the safety and paused. We both had a closer look and then asked the owners. Apparently the safety was the trigger. Anyway, no one was licensed, so we searched the house for extra ammunition or other weapons. No one is really supposed to have firearms here unless you have a good reason. I do not know why I did it. It was a dumb idea given the state of the house in the area, dog excrement on the floor and stuff, diapers everywhere. I opened the refrigerator, staring face to face with a kangaroo with its paws out looking at me. That was the top shelf. I looked down one shelf and there was the other half of the kangaroo, tail hanging down off the middle shelf. The smell. Oh dear, the smell. The light was on. I am not sure the refrigerator actually worked though. Closed the door pretty fast. Of course, the most reasonable thing to do was move to another part of the room and yell at my partner to check the refrigerator. Not really creepy, just unusual. I was newish at the time. Thank you for watching this video to the end. In the comments under the video, write your similar stories. And also be sure to subscribe to our channel to not miss new super interesting videos. And I advise you to watch our other videos.